Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 124.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night. Some of you may get that movie reference, maybe not. Anyway, I'm your host, Jay. Glad that you guys are here for another episode. Today, we're going to keep talking about these essential skills. It's just oftentimes when I'm working with individuals in coaching sessions or group sessions, as you guys know, right now, we're still doing a mastermind group. In fact, now is the today, when you're listening to this, is probably the last day to sign up for the next mastermind group, where we're going to be talking all about finding deals at discount. So we're going to be doing that here. The live webinars start in a few hours from now. So you want to make sure that you get yourself over to cashflowdiary.com/wholesale webinars if that's something that you are interested in. Again, cashflowdiary.com/wholesale webinars. We're going to be talking about finding deals at discounts. It's a 3-webinar series. It's going to be awesome. Be there live. If you've never had the opportunity to, interact live, I would love to have you there. So feel free to make that happen. Anyway, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is another necessary skill. And it's an interesting one because there are many different degrees and definitions as it floats about. One of the things that came to my mind, I was thinking about this skill, is one of my mentors. He used to always say, and it's just funny. He said, "Blessed be the flexible, for they will never be bent out of shape." I always thought that was funny. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, maybe you've heard it before. It doesn't really matter. To me, it is still funny, and flexibility is definitely something that is required if you're going to go on this journey. If you're going to begin to build your cash flow in any way, shape, or form, you must maintain that flexibility throughout your entire career. You are never done changing and growing in many different ways. And just so that we're clear, I'm not saying that you have to be able to touch your knees and touch your toes and all those yoga poses. For those of you who can, do that, congratulations. It's great. That's not the type of flexibility that we're talking about today. Primarily, though, as an entrepreneur, there, I would say, are a number of different areas that we need to be flexible in, for sure. And one of them, and most of them, have to do with the mental realm. I see the more I play this game, the more it seems as though the mental realm, the mental, emotional, spiritual realm is where most of this game is won or lost inside of our ability to be emotionally intelligent, if you will. One of the major pieces. So, we all have ideas, and I know that, for some of us, a time of year is fast approaching where we like to sit down and go, okay, here's everything that I would like to have happen over the next 12 months. This is how I want it to go. And at the end of the day, let me ask you that question. How did it go this year when you did that? If you look back, did everything you want to have happen actually happen? Did it go in the fashion or manner that you thought it would actually go? Or did something else different happen? And most importantly, notice how I just said, when something else different happened, how did you respond to that? And that's primarily the subject of this particular episode, is flexibility. When we're looking at the area of plans versus our actual events, that's one of those important areas, right? We get our mindset, or at least I get my mindset. Okay, here's what's going to happen. Here's how it's going to go. It's going to be 100% perfect, and boom, go. But yet, rarely does that ever actually happen. What areas have you ever experienced a change in versus your plans versus actual events? I know as I was thinking about this, I think about the famous one is pro formas at acquisition. So you you pick up a building, you're like, this is how it's going to work. Maybe you're examining businesses right now. You're like, this is what's going to do. Or maybe you're looking at, silver or gold or any other type of investment, and you're going, this is how it should work. And then you go back and you look at the history and it's not quite the same. Yet, how do you respond when that trend line is not exactly what you experienced? And learning how you respond to that is a very key skill, and understanding that it's okay to be flexible. It's okay that things didn't go the way that you intended. I know on this journey as an entrepreneur, we all know that we can't do it all ourselves, or if we do try to do it all ourselves, we can't do it all well by ourselves, which therefore means by default, if we're going to serve hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, and dare I say millions, you must learn to work with other individuals. Well, that process of learning to work with other individuals or vendors is, guess what? Also a unique experience, because the vendor comes over, right? They say, hey, here's what's going to happen. I have planned to do these things. I plan for the job to cost this much. I plan for these things to happen in this order, this way, and this is how it should go. Yet, it's not really often how that works. I mean, think about it. How many times have you opened up a wall or looked inside or opened, because I know this happened, the perfect example. I know this time or around this time last year or recently, some of you may remember, it was the polar vortex, right? It was coming up. It was at the beginning of the year. And I promise you, it was not a planned event to have my roofs freeze, water pipes burst, and all this manner of things. I know for one of our buildings, the pipe burst. It flooded the street. I mean, we're talking police and all these other things. That destroys everything you were thinking about when it comes to your pro forma, and definitely isn't something a vendor could have ever prevented. But these are all the things that happen. What happens when that, property manager? What happens when that plumber? What happens when that electrician? What happens when somebody doesn't show up and do the things that they said they're going to do? I know you're like, Jay, I get all that. Those are the things that I want to avoid. I hear you. What I'm trying to say to you, what I'm saying to you right now is complete avoidance of these things and expecting to be rigid is not likely to happen. Here's another area where you might want to develop some flexibility. Marketing strategies. You're like, hey, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make a website. I'm going to start this, campaign over here, or I'm going to go to this networking event, or you know what? I've got 40 people scheduled for my next cash flow game. And by the way, that's good. That's very, very good. You got 40 people scheduled for your next cash flow game. And for whatever reason, people don't show up, or the phone doesn't ring. And, interpreting that information correctly is really important. Interpreting that information correctly is really important. Just because someone doesn't accept your offers, just because someone doesn't show up, doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong or incorrect or not the right thing to do. Understanding how to grow in your flexibility in these areas and more. We're going to go over some more. I just want to highlight these things so that you can hopefully define and develop the continued courage to keep pushing forward, because not every marketing strategy works. So maybe you're thinking, hey, maybe I should start a podcast. Okay, cool. But that's not guaranteed to work. You're not guaranteed to be able to get, guests and interviews, or even have something interesting to say. And what about those people that listen? All of those things are there. Now, there are ways, obviously, to increase your odds of success. And heaven forbid, should we start talking about advertising and, paid media or YouTube and social media, all these things. There are so many to choose from. My only point is to manage your expectations properly. And to manage your expectations properly simply means to know and be okay with the fact that I'm getting feedback, not getting sold out to a particular outcome. When you're able to process the information that you receive back as feedback, you won't quit. And that's my encouragement to you as we continue. We talked about those unplanned events, the weather patterns. What about when the building burns down. That's an unplanned event. Hopefully, yeah, you have insurance, but just because you have insurance doesn't mean that was a part of your plan. And most importantly, are you willing to be flexible to deal with those inconveniences? Those are the things that, typically come up when we're being inflexible, is how well we deal with those perceived inconveniences. There are so many options today in that regard of what we could choose to do. And we'll talk about that as we get close to the end. Here's another area. As the small entrepreneur, solopreneur, small business owner, whatever you want to call it, one of those things that's hyper important. In fact, it's probably the motivator why you're still, pushing and working to make something happen, is the family. And occasionally we've got to still develop flexibility with them. And just to give you some insight into the life of our household, I know recently, here are just some of the things. We had one child end up with not just ringworm, but also chickenpox. But at the same time, go figure. I'm like, I don't even understand that one. And then, my wife was recently in a car accident and had an episode of vertigo. I was like, okay, this is crazy. Why is this going on? And then one of my relatives, passed away. All of these things happen, but that doesn't mean as an entrepreneur. See, as an employee, in a lot of those cases, you get to call in sick, right? Yeah, you got vacation or bereavement leave. You got all these other things that you could do in order to, compensate for that time. And you got to think about it. As an entrepreneur, your job is going to become serving your customers and developing flexibility in that way. Now, what's your plan for dealing with those things? How is that going to work in your particular life? Is it going to work too well? How flexible are you when the kids burst in the office door and they just want to sit in your lap? Or when one of those unplanned things that happens as it attacks those individuals with whom you care about and have relationships with? How does that work? All of those things continue to happen. And the interesting thing is family also happens to all of your investors and to all of the vendors and to all the other individuals who are involved in some way, shape, or form as it relates to your business. See, one of the things that I think about when it comes to flexibility that I think is something important that I want to share with you is that you and I must learn to develop an appetite for quickly interpreting when change is required. It's one of the things that I love to pursue most and first, especially when I'm doing something new. My job is to break it as quickly as humanly possible so that I can change and make those necessary changes. I would prefer to get the pain of the lack of success or the outcomes that I want over with as quickly as humanly possible. So let me please go through 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 examples of something bad so I can get to the one that works, and then I will just duplicate that over and over and over again. And oftentimes, though, when we are trying something new, as you guys know, you're not met with success. Success doesn't meet you at the beginning. And if it does, often that's not so good either. And we operate in a way that where we go, this is the way I see it happening, therefore it must be that way. And if it doesn't, then the idea just dies. We don't learn to develop the necessary perseverance. See, one of the things about being flexible when we're developing this appetite for quickly interpreting when change is needed, we can learn from watching a sport. Now, I know some of you may not like this particular sport, but it's a sport nonetheless in which we can learn a lesson about business, at least in this way. And you can do this with probably nearly every sport. It's just that my frame of reference is somewhat limited. So when you look at the sport of American football, if you will, oftentimes you see the men all lined up on the field, and then all of a sudden, at the last second, the quarterback, for whatever reason, starts shouting out something different, and the people on the field start changing positions at the perceivingly last minute. Well, what happened? Well, what happened is he got feedback. He had a plan. This is the way we planned for it to go. And then he surveyed and looked over the field to see what was happening and said, oh, we need to adjust. He didn't try to force his way necessarily. He didn't say, okay, I see this is coming, and you know what? I'm just going to keep headlong because this is the way that the coach said is supposed to work this way. And he chose to take responsibility for the outcome of reaching the goal, as opposed to just saying, you know what? Hey, coach, see, that's the play you called. Oh, well, look what happened. And he called what they call an audible. He read the defense and adjusted his play or strategy accordingly. And we must, as entrepreneurs, do the same. What are some of the ways that you can read the defense, if you will? One of those is just understand what your customers are telling you. They vote with their dollars. They vote with their opt-ins. They vote with their attendance. They're voting in that way. They're voting with, in some cases, how often they share or don't share something. Do they click the like button or not? All of these things can help you understand. Here's the major question you must learn to ask is why. I was taught a long time ago, and I share with you today, know why they buy, know why they don't buy. Your customers are telling you something. Even when they buy, don't just celebrate going, yay, they bought the house, or yay, they bought my product, or yay, we got the sell. Find out why. Not finding out why will hurt you at some point. And the other thing to examine is, what aren't they saying? Because they may be very vocal in some areas, but there could also be information in the things that they're not saying. Just because they're not saying something, it doesn't mean that it's not worthy of improving. Just because they're not saying something bad doesn't mean that there isn't something worth improving. Meaning, what if what is bad is so bad that they didn't even bother to bring up this other thing that's annoying someone else? Another thing to think about is they might not be saying anything simply because some people just don't want to bother you. They're like, hey, I think he's busy right now. And maybe, just maybe, the reason they're not saying anything is because they don't think it's possible to actually communicate, or that you don't care, that you haven't asked. We do our best to ask often. We do our best to have lots of interaction. As you guys know, or many of you know, we do the web show on Tuesdays that give you an opportunity to ask lots of questions. That's part of how we get the feedback. Many of you send in emails to the show and emails to our website so that, you know, when, hey, I remember a number of episodes back, you were like, hey, the audio quality is not so great, man. Can you work on that? And we did our best to work on that. And we worked with some of you, and hopefully that worked out. And things seem to be better today, which is good. You need that feedback. Go get it. Go be flexible. You don't know what you're going to hear, and it might all be good, but even if it's not, it's still valuable. See, when it comes to this topic of flexibility, you're managing kind of three different things: your stress, your attitude, and, dare I say it, your level of faith. See, when your level of stress is managed by just how you react to the information, the feedback, as I said, that you're given. Does it suddenly go, oh man, it's broken. I hate when this happens. I hate this feeling. Oh, it's broken. We should have studied longer before we started. Here's something I've learned. Very rarely does an offer that I write actually stay the same from the time that I wrote it to the close of escrow. Very rarely does a business not change the way that it looks from the time of conception to the time where the customers are actually paying for it, and or it matures. How you respond to that will indeed affect your stress level. I hope that you and myself and all of us, as we get this feedback, we continue to operate in such a way that we move forward, that we learn to fail forward and be okay with that, and not necessarily force the way that we want those things to happen. And that's a part of the attitude that you've got to manage when, well, it's time to be flexible. Having that flexible attitude can help you uncover hidden gems and areas, especially from those who aren't with you, those who may not agree with your service or your slant or your thoughts or viewpoints. Those are sometimes and often very valuable places. And sometimes, because of our limited perspective, we can only see things happening, we'll say, one of two ways. If it can't happen this way, then it's got to happen this way. Well, what if there's a third way? And unfortunately, because of just how we're used to responding to things, we lose faith. How many people can we serve in that situation? And I would submit to you, it's nowhere near as many if we continue to bolster the faith and say, you know what? One day we will eventually get this right. One day. One of the attitudes of flexibility that I have, I share with my wife often, especially when I'm going through something new, is like, okay, honey, here we go. It's something I say to her a lot. Hey, okay, honey, here we go. She's like, oh, what now? It's time for us, or me rather, to make a whole bunch of expensive mistakes. And that's usually how I look at it. I know that I'm going to make a lot of expensive mistakes in the beginning because that's what happens. We're just going to plow through. We're going to make all the mistakes. We're going to do our best to try to make them as quickly as possible so we can get to the other side. Because how many times have you persevered past something and gotten to the other side and then, oh my gosh, I love it. See, the piece that we've got to really think about and just be prepared for every day is that when it doesn't go as planned. I'm not saying that you run into everything with a negative attitude going, well, no sense in planning, or man, you know what? No, why bother trying? Because it's not going to go as I planned anyway. You go with the intent to see the goal. The path, often changes. Go for the goal. And then when, as I was saying, it doesn't go as planned, just know that you've got 3 choices. The first one, and I think too many make, is quit. That's just it. We quit. I've said this before. I'm just grateful that Thomas Edison didn't quit. I'm grateful that the Wright brothers didn't quit. I'm really grateful that Steve Jobs, well, he got fired, but that he didn't quit. I'm grateful for that, because there are many times that on the way to what it is that you were supposed to achieve, you'll be asked, do you want to quit? Oftentimes, another potential thing that we can do is we just avoid even putting ourselves in a situation where we have an opportunity to have things not go as planned. What does that mean? That means we try to control that environment so much so it drives everybody away from us or just nuts. Yet, what is required in order to make this entrepreneurship thing work? What is required is in the idea, this concept of flexibility, and this concept of learning how to press on is one word: surrender. Surrendering to the process, surrendering to knowing that we are currently not in a perfect form. Our business is not currently in its most perfect form. It can get there, but there are so many rough spots that have to be hewn off in very rough ways. And that's okay. Surrender. Surrendering to the process of, you know what? I don't know everything. Even if I've got 12 degrees and letters after my name, I don't know everything. The faster we surrender to that one, the more people we end up being able to serve, and the more things that can begin to happen. Surrendering to the process that, as I said earlier, it's not always going to go. People will disappoint, and that's okay. It's not the end. Surrendering to knowing that occasionally what will happen is that it will cause you stress. But learning how to deal with that in a very positive way, learning how to manage it, learning how to get knocked down and get back up, and surrendering to the process of going, you know what, I will never do that again, or I'll never do it that way again, is valuable later. Many of those that we call wise have a lot of this particular characteristic. And as we go out there to serve our customers, as we go out there to find them, as we go out there to develop those streams of cash flow, and as you've heard me say, become that bigger, better, badder investor, surrender is definitely required in order to keep it going. There is no pre-written script that you and I have access to that can require us to be so rigid, so sure of what's going to happen, that surrender isn't necessary. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.